My background was I was basically collecting intel, but I was used mainly as a honey trap or alternatively as a sex worker spy. No surprise there.
Well, Beverli, welcome to the BASES project, and you are appearing at BASES 2025 on the December 12th, 13th and 14th of December, in December. And it's tremendous to have you in the studio, but let's forget about all that rubbish. You're all glammed up, ready to go. So tell us about this conference that somebody called Miles Johnston's invited you to.
Well, the wonderful Miles Johnston is putting on the BASES project, which is going to have some incredible speakers. And I personally inviting everyone to come along because we will be doing some amazing energy and frequency work and doing a couple of experiments that will include audience participation. And this has not been done before. It's been the last time it was done was in 1978 out in Sun City in South Africa to a very, very large audience at the Super Bowl. And it was extremely well received by all the general public. It was wonderful. So please come and watch us all because we're going to give you some really amazing facts.
Beverli, a sweet little thing like you wouldn't say anything out of line, and you wouldn't stir any controversy, and you were invited to leave South Africa. Is that true?
Yes, invited to leave to South Africa is probably the best way to say it.
If you don't get out of here, you're in there.
Yeah, that's it. And
in here was different to in there.
It was indeed extremely different because I was doing a lot of inside work on Parliament and with the President and all of his various individuals that are working at the government level. So yes, unfortunately, because I was one of the individuals that was a remote viewer and somebody that was providing intel to the government at the time, it was necessary for them to say, you either take your British passport and go back home, or we're going to have to ask you to come and be, shall we call it, a member of the state, but perhaps under bars and lock and key, because I knew too much.
It's a bit like being on Her Majesty's secret, Her Majesty's service.
Her Majesty's pleasure, yes. It's a bit like Her Majesty's pleasure, but in the wrong place. Not the best place to be.
And that was quite some time ago, I understand.
It was, yes. That's over, gosh, that's about 26 or 27 years ago. It's a long time ago.
So that was under the old regime?
It was, yes, under the old, before Mandela came into power.
And Mandela was an operational asset, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. But then, as we are aware, the real Mandela was dispatched and passed away, and they put in his place someone else. So there was a time when I think the regime had mentioned that he had passed, but they needed to utilize the secondary asset, which was a gentleman from another country who had the same look, the same matching, whatever was necessary.
Now, are you talking about Trump or Biden? No.
No, we're talking about Mandela.
Oh, sorry. Am I suggesting that maybe it's not? I'm sorry for interrupting. Do you think this is where the so-called Mandela effect has been generated, that he died? And
yes, I think the Mandela effect was generated during that time period because a lot of us do recall seeing just snippets of news that Mandela had passed away, and then suddenly they withdrew all of that and there was a totally different announcement that went out, almost like, in a way, a different timeline. And this is where that Mandela effect came about. So the new Mandela, if you like, the one that was around from the time of his release and moving forward, had been not only groomed, but he had been well schooled in what was required of those that actually run the country.
But was Mandela actual, we'll say, wasn't he trained in prison to be leader then?
He was.
Did they I
Yeah.
mean, they must have coached him.
He was trained, Mandela was trained to be leader, and it was expected that he would be leader. All of the ministers and those that were in government that I was assisting at the time, they had realized and acknowledged that he would be leader. But there were certain areas that they wanted to ensure, met the correct criteria, and that the Crown still had a level of influence in the country.
That is so well put. But would that make him an MI6 asset? Is that putting it crudely, or was it?
It would make Mandela box or MI6 or 5, whichever you'd like to call it. Either way, it's box, and he definitely was assigned to box and had his own handlers. In fact, more than one handler.
Is that the term, boxed?
Boxed, yeah.
I've heard that term, but I didn't quite know what it was.
Yeah, it's boxed.
In other words, you were in a confined environment and
boxed. Also, what was very interesting is in those days, is that if they were going to send anything, rather than say which three-lettered agencies they were going to send it to, if it was going to be those within Great Britain, they would say, oh, this needs to go to box. In other words, the box that contains all of the secret memos and the information, etc., at head office, it's just referred to as box.
Is that not the room which is acoustically and electrically screened where they would hold their secret meetings? No.
It also can be referred to that, but sometimes, like at Shrivenham, they call that the funny farm. That's how everybody refers to it, including myself. Anyone who's worked there or has had interactions with individuals in those areas, they call it the funny farm. Or, if it's head office in London, it would be box.
So are you suggesting that film, the books Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, and the other book of a similar name by the same author is accurate?
From what I've seen, most of it is accurate, yes.
Based on the fact it's compromised and it's full of...
Absolutely.
Well, this is all very fantastic. And so I don't think you'll be talking about this at the conference, but you can be talking about all this sort of stuff. But anyway, this is our little promo for the conference. So we've had a little interesting interlude. Well, welcome to Wiltshire.
Thank you.
Welcome to, actually, we've been to Honey Street. We've been to the Crop Circle Exhibition Centre run by the wonderful Monique Klinkerberger. And that's interesting. Perception management.
Yes.
And we have had our trials and tribulations with the BASES automobile.
Yes, indeed.
And we're here, and that was there and here. And now we're in the studio. And it's really a big deal and a big privilege that you've come the whole way down on the M42 and the tourist attractions of Birmingham.
Oh, Lord. 6 hours later, which is good. But at least the roads were fine, which was the main thing.
Well, you're here now, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
So, you are a very complex person. You've got a lot to say. So, why should anyone pay a blind bit of attention to what you're saying?
That's a really good question. I would like to say that, and I will be saying, that to pay attention, if you wish, it's purely free will, because everyone has the free will to decide whether they want to listen or whether they don't. But I will share my story anyway. And the story is, as you say, it's very complex. And I will draw our attention back to 2005, which was the 7th of July London bombings event, where I unfortunately got caught up while I was working for one of the top blue chip consultancy agencies in London, working on the 2012 London Olympics, part of the deep security, the inner ring, the bird table, and all those other areas that we were working with at the time. And I was heading into London to do a very large presentation. So some of the G8 individuals that were coming down from where they were, up country, and they were coming secretly to attend on one of the sites that were in London, was heading that way on the train. And I'd already put together the presentation. A couple of my colleagues, we'd run through it the night before So we'd gone to bed after we'd been told that we'd won the Olympics, which was fantastic. So we knew that our jobs were secure for quite a considerable time. And we'd gone through the presentation, we were ready, and getting myself my bags packed, laptop done, everything ready to go into town, into London, the very next day, as quickly as possible, to make sure that we were ready to be in the particular turquoise suite that our organization had booked, to make sure that the dignitaries could be dropped at the back of the building and then brought in secretly for this briefing. So that was where I was heading to. But this is where the story starts, is I had taken on this role and was busy making inroads and doing what I do best, which is intelligence. And unfortunately, wrong place, wrong time. Ended up being caught up in the Russell Square train and injured. I came out the other side and headed towards the office anyway in a daze. And as I was talking to my colleague on the phone, I heard an unholy bang, and I was calling out to him. Obviously, he was gone because our offices were situated where the bus blew up. So I'm the only survivor of 7/7 that has direct experience of two sites, Russell Square and the bomb that's in the street by the bus. So those were the two areas. And this is where all of the issues started. Before then, I didn't have that many memories at all. I hadn't remembered all of the 20 years and return information. I'd always had my contact that I've had for 63 years with a star being called Da'ar. And that was when I met him, which was when I was little, when I was only 3. And I've known him and spoken to him and had downloads from him for 63 years. That was always common in my life. I'd had it all the time. It had never changed. He was always a constant in my life. But with the bomb going off and the injuries, because I'd been knocked unconscious, when I came to, not only did I come to with complex PTSD, but I suddenly came to with all sorts of memories that I hadn't had before. And this is where the issues had started. All of this started coming flooding back. And it was extremely difficult. And I had to go through to St Bartholomew's Hospital in London, and I was given a lot of assistance by the trauma crew there. And they were able to help me process all that I was seeing and all that I was experiencing, because everything that had been locked away for all these years, or all those years before 2005, they were just all flooding through. And it made it extremely difficult because I couldn't hardly sleep. I wasn't particularly interested in eating. Also, I had injuries. I mean, I wasn't able to swallow, and I had the entire side of my face had to be rebuilt, and I needed new jawbone, new cheekbones, teeth to be created, new bone to be created in my face. So I had a lot of injuries, which took about 2.5 years-ish, around there, to rebuild what was necessary. So during that time, all of these memories started flooding back. And this is why I wrote the book, The Horse Girl. Yeah, and that was about surviving trauma, that was surviving CSA, child sex abuse, and satanic ritualistic abuse, as well as all sorts of other horrific things that are in the book. I will say it's a very difficult read. But then also there's all the other memories that were coming through. So let's return back to what had happened, not just after the book was created, about the ritualistic abuse and the child sex abuse and the dungeons and all those awful things, but also let's look at my next book, which covers all of the aspects that I remember and recall in great detail, the 20 and return cycles, of which I have done only 3. So the first one being in the early 60s as a small child, and there's 2 others. All of those will be discussed in detail at the conference. And also we've got some of the links into the integrated space plan. So because of the early years where we're looking at, 2004, 2003, 1987, all of those milestones were already known in the greater space program, particularly across Russia, America, China, and Great Britain.
Now, we can't avoid this huge big map thing that I've got sitting beside you. That's the integrated space. You use that term. So the important thing about this is that that's not fiction.
No, it's not.
So since we've got that beside you,
Shall I refer to it?
why don't you refer to it, and then maybe, why don't you refer to this? This is
Okay. Yeah, I will do that. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll move forward
Yeah.
and I'll grab it. Okay.
Do you want me to help you? No, if you grab it, you're a big girl, you can do that.
What's very interesting here is that part of the systems, if you start looking at when I had the interaction with the R and some of the craft, because it was in the 60s, 1963, 64, around those times, we've got that area of time when the United States actually launched vehicle capabilities, which was part of the integrated space plan. And when we see some of those at the top, very interestingly, we've got in 1960, 61, and 65, there's Delta, Titan II, and the Scout. Nothing better than a pointer. It's good.
Well, it doesn't scratch the screen.
It won't scratch the screen. Perfect. So we've got the space shuttle enhancements as well as the invigorated ELF fleet, which is quite interesting as well. And then you've got the recovery aspect. But then what is important with those is that all of those eras, particularly up to 1988 and 1993, is part of the process where I was already experiencing my 20 years and return. Although I've been asked to do an extra one the last time I disappeared, but actually refrained from doing any more after 2005. We also have some of the areas which is, I think, because this is the first generation was really, if you think about it, because of my age, I was part of the very first generation, which would have been sort of in the 60s. It was really in the 60s.
Okay, tell us exactly what you mean by the 20 and back program.
Oh, okay. So
Just
during,
so we anytime there's some kind of a process you mentioned, just explain it from your perspective.
Okay. So to explain the 20 years and return, and the reason why I use 20 years and return is because the 20 and back has been trademarked, and that we're not allowed to use 20 and back anymore because it's trademarked, and we'll probably end up in a lot of trouble from the person who owns the trademark.
Is this another idiot who's...
So we can't use
Is
that.
this another idiot who's decided to trademark a commonly known term and like orgon?
Yes, that's very true. So I'm using, and in my book I've got a very large chapter on the 20 and return for that very reason. So the 20 and return in my case is a particular set of contracts that I had agreed to go off-world for a certain period of time, i.e. 20 years, and to either be age advanced or age regressed, and to be returned back to the time with which I left and went off planet. And my experiences of that are very clear, is I had agreed to be part of a specific program. And because I had already done 9 years Earthwise, working within an organization that had a lot of Illuminati families in it, and doing the types of sexual activity that is necessary in those particular families to ensure that there is a level of evidence, shall we say, that can be used to blackmail individuals and can also be used to show evidence that those individuals had fathered specific children, or had participated in other programs. Now, I had 9 years of that from a very young age, right through the time that I escaped, and that's in the Horse Girl. So because I was already part of that and I'd already been well schooled and well groomed, part of the request at the time was, could we utilize your capabilities and abilities to provide either sexual traps or honey traps or sexual activity and favors, not only to human beings that were of Germanic extraction, but also for those individuals that, like other beings of other planets, could have those types of information, shall we say, extracted as part of Pillow Talk. And this was one of the reasons why I had been returned a couple of times to participate in the 20 and return programs as a honey trap operative that used to give the information to one of the feline racers who was one of my handlers, who then later also assisted in making sure that I returned back to Earth and that I did not, after 2005, I did not go back for any further operations. So we had then, as part of this is the extended duration, and we've got the commercial space shuttles and facilities and the permanent human presence in space. So this was produced by Rockwell International, and this particular document here that we see is from February 1989. And this was the preliminary plan, which, as you can see, is substantial. But it is an actual document. It is not something that I think is commonly available anymore because it's really quite old. And it is something that is very detailed, but it is basically the first level, the preliminary level of the plan. But there's many other levels now that form part of this particular plan. And there's process flows, there's Visio diagrams, and there's all sorts of other intricate details in each of these levels. Because if you have a look, you'll see 83, 88, 93, 98, 2003, all the way down to 2050. And this shows the utilization of both humans, but also how the beginnings of humans would start, their interstellar operations, and how far back those operations actually took place. That was substantial. And this was all happening in the 60s. And it was extremely detailed, and the plan was known by operatives that were going off-world. So those of us who were part of the initial programs, not necessarily even SSP, possibly Secret Space Program, possibly before that, and it was to gather intelligence from those beings that were participating, both with the Germanic, human Germanic individuals and others. So when we start saying about the persistence of humans out in space, you'll notice that this particular pink ring here, when we had the first generation of the reusable spacecraft, that was in the early 80s, so 83 right through to 88. This area here was where we had the American Space Shuttle program and then the robotic one. But the area that I was very involved in was this area here, the extended duration of the orbiter and commercial space facilities, because the ranch, which is what we ended up calling it, those of us that were working at the ranch, we would then be placed there in specific levels and then entertain individuals and entities and other beings, as well as human beings, felines, and others. And we would then find a way in which to extract information during sexual activity.
So you're talking sexual activity and other entertaining purposes and communication with other beings, and it all works. In other words, you're compatible with those other beings.
Compatible to a point. Some beings are not compatible sexually with human beings. However, because they're able to put human beings back together, the act, if you like, or the act where they become aggressive and utilize their sexual energy ends up with the human being injured significantly.
You're talking the arms ripped off and all that?
Or worse. You can then say that that individual that is participating in a type of sexual act with another being, those energies, you could be frazzled, so therefore your energy field or your toroidal field, all of that would become depleted and you would expire, which means that they would have to regenerate you and you'd have to go back into service again. So each time the expiration takes place, what they do is they would kickstart you and then they would create an extra clone. So during my time, I had 3 additional clones that were created. B52 was one of them. And there are a number of drawings that have been created by an artist who's been really wonderful, and it's created the 3 other beings. And there was Red, who was the one with bright red hair, and there was the one that was really very difficult, which was very, very dark hair, very, very dark type of being, who was a no-nonsense person. And she was able to ensure that if anything happened, she would be able to extricate whoever was necessary. So she was one of those that used to kick ass, not like me. But nonetheless, they utilized my DNA structures because I think that my skill set was intelligence extraction. And because they trained me to utilize my energies in such a way that whether it's male or female, that energy would actually permeate those individuals, and it would be easy for them to talk to me, and they would often say to me, I really don't know why I'm saying this to you, and yet they would be saying it to me. And this is something that I had been trained for, because unfortunately, earthwise, I'd had the 9 years of abuse, so all of the groundwork had already been done. All of the torture had already been done, so I had been trained and groomed. So it was easier for them to say to me, we would like to offer you a contract for 20 years off-world to do these particular tasks and to report into the feline individual with whatever you find out. And these areas that we have here, the permanent human presence in space, but the extended duration orbiter and commercial space facilities, this is key, because the planetoid, the ranch that had many levels and different pleasure areas, or some people used to call it the pleasure planet. It wasn't a planet, it was a planetoid. But the ranch and the planetoid for pleasure was available to all species, irrespective of what they were, where they came from. It was an area that they could go to and they could feel secure. Also, royalty used to come through a separate entrance and they would be given safe passage. So it was a totally different type of place that everybody knew about, and it was something that would be really well sought after, to be given the opportunity to go to the pleasure planet or the ranch and meet ladies or men or creatures or beings or whatever it was that those individuals wanted. But you could actually have that, exactly what that says here, the extended duration commercial space facilities, not just mining facilities, and not just for miners or for operatives or for royalty or for ambassadors or others, but just general run-of-the-mill individuals that were working to gather coin. This is where my entry into all of this started. And when the 2005 7th of July London bombings took place, this was the catalyst for all of my memories to resurface and to come back And I think the joke amongst all of us and my family, everyone, is a bloody good bang on the bonds. In other words, being rendered unconscious for 12 minutes was all it took for all of the memories to come flooding back. So this area is where it started.
Do you think that was intentional in some way?
I think the bang on the bonds could have been.
It was not a coincidence.
Yeah, it could have been. It could have been necessary for that information to come out, because it took a long time to achieve all of that information. But when it came forward, there was no one more surprised than me, because I was living a life not realizing that all of this had happened to me. And it was very difficult at the time to process and deal with it, which then led to complex PTSD and years of it. And years of discussing what had happened, what I was seeing, taking tablets, going back to the hospital, being reviewed every couple of weeks, because what was coming out was literally unheard of. And this is different to what other survivors had experienced. But if other survivors had had trauma in their childhood, those that I met before at the hospital, they had said the same thing, that they had had something that had come forward in them and awakened in them. They had these memories that had come forward, particularly if they'd had extended child abuse. Like myself, they were remembering. So that was common, but what was not common was the off-world aspect, and being taken for 20 years and then being returned, and what I was seeing. And this was this for all of the doctors, the clinicians, etc., this was extremely interesting for them, because they'd not had somebody before that had gone through the 7th of July bombs and come back with an off-world experience that was very detailed, that was very specific, where it was, what was seen, how it was happening, what were the transports like, what was everybody wearing, what were we eating, what was the language that was spoken, what were the symbols that were on the side of the walls. You know, how often did we go to, you know, the Black Pyramid that was in the Arctic area. All of this detail was significant. And they were forever trying to find references to this in 2005, right through till the end of my 10-year program with them. Where could this information have been found elsewhere? And they realized, actually, this information is not available anywhere else.
Well, you've just run off a whole pile of questions and details, which is a fine set of details. You could just sort of sit back and tell us all about each one, and away you go. And when you mentioned this for the first time, did they think you were nuts? Did you say this in hospital or in the funny farm, or what was the reaction?
It was the first time I'd mentioned it was to a really lovely young psychologist that was he'd been given the work to speak to all of the 7/7 survivors, and he was given the opportunity to speak to everyone. And when I'd started explaining what had happened to me and what I was remembering, he had asked special permission if I could be given like just a patient number. They never had my name. They just gave initials, and it gave me a number. And he was then using that as his own research, because he was looking into how trauma can actually bring about memories that were so far buried from other areas in other dimensions or other facilities around the world. He did not buy into the false memory brigade, which has since been, as you well know, the false memory organizations and associations have been closed down, and that has been proven to not be factual. So he didn't buy into that at all in 2005, and he said, I want to know all of it, which was very good for me, because then I could literally just rant and rave and explain what I'd seen, what I remember, And some of it is in chronological order, some of it is not in chronological order. So what I've had to do is I've had to go back and I've had to remember the pieces and how everything is framed and put it all back together in order to make sure that the book makes sense with my editor. And Selma and I have spent a lot of time going back, which is why the book has taken this long. It's taken since 2005 to put together, because it's piecing it piece by piece. What was this area? What was that area? How was it working? And particularly very key things like the auction room. There is an auction room that is also on the planetoid, where different races of beings can purchase human ovum and human sperm, and human ovum and sperm that have already been mixed, and also those that have had some form of genetic decoding or splicing with other beings, like felines, like amphibians, like Arcturians, like Pleiadians, all of those. You can actually buy that. And I had specific memories of the auction room. But what was very interesting is the lad that was next to me. He was about 8 years old, and I remember him because he was terrified. And he had a very big gap in his teeth. And I said to him, you know, you just look like a beaver. And he laughed and he said, yeah, I feel like a beaver. And he had these big shoes on, and the shoes didn't match. And I ended up nicknaming him Beaver Boy. And he, in turn, called me Sissy. And years and years and years later, a few years ago, I ran into somebody at one of the very large events. And I looked at him and I thought, I know you from somewhere. And I realized that this chap, who was then in his late 30s, it was actually Beaver Boy. And he started getting his memories back. And he was actually doing some work with a really wonderful man, Alessandro. And they had been doing 2-3 years worth of work with regression and going back and going back. And he did remember Sissy being me. And when he met me, he said, I know you, but I don't know where you're from. And then he realized, I know who you are, you're Sissy. And I said, how did you know that name? And he said, yeah, you know who I am and I know who you are. I said, let's have a look and see if we can find the auction house, the auction area. What did they take from us? And we eventually managed over a period of a year or two to find out that the human ovum from me, that they had taken 12 eggs and that they had set them aside in sets of 4. And those 4 eggs were available to be auctioned off. And he was also participating in various other programs, but he was actually sold. He was sold elsewhere, and that's his story to tell. And he remembers a lot of it, and he remembers where he was, what he was, but also other children that were being sold at the same time, because we were aware that there is an agreement with the off-worlders to come and take various children at any time from Earth to be sold, either as slaves or as companions, or for whatever reason. They can sell them at this particular auction center.
So, rants and all those details you mentioned earlier, you listed about 5 or 6 or 7 of them. Can you go into that now, please?
So when I was involved with the very first program, which was in the early 60s, so when I was born, I ended up when I was about 3. So I was born in 61. I was about 3 years old, so it was 1964. I was in Merrifield Close in Plimpton in Plymouth, and I managed to get out of the back door, and the back gate had been left open because the bins were behind the gate, and the gate had been opened, and for some reason it had been swinging, and I managed to get downstairs unseen by those that were bringing me up. got out of the back gate and toddled out, walked out the bottom of the driveway, turned left, down to the bottom of the main road, turned left again, went down the hill and started going up the hill, and then went over a stile in through the hedgerows and started walking up the hill where the sheep were to a small copse of trees. And that was the very first time that I was then whisked up into a craft, and that's the first time that I met Da'a. And Da'a was on the craft along with many, many other children that were all around about the same age as myself. And they were all speaking different languages. I was speaking whatever little bit of language that I could at the age of 3, but we were all able to sit on the floor and play with whatever toys they had. And we were able to communicate with these beings, and we were different ages. I mean, some were 3, 4, 5, some were 6, some were a little bit older, but they were from all over the world. And I remember looking at these different children and thinking these were going to be a great playgroup. I was really happy because I was alone as a child, and I was happy that I had friends to play with, and we were able to play in this room, which was a good temperature and no issues. And on the craft, we were then talking and being asked different aspects before being taken to a point where we were age progressed. And that was the first time of the first set of 20 years and return. And during that time, I was then told, this is what's going to be happening in the 9 years of your life in Earth School. This is what is going to happen to you. And these are what we would like you to do, if possible, so that you can help us move and shift the timeline, but also move and shift so that humanity can change some of the areas and we can progress forward quicker than we might have before. And that is what I agreed to.
So what were the other children like? What sort of races and what were the beings that you were talking with? What type? And again, I'm looking for symbols, I'm looking for insignia, all sorts of marks, color, lighting. What did it look like inside, outside?
The outside was, the first piece was egg-shaped, and that was the piece that I saw originally, was the egg-shaped, that looked almost like a teardrop, but I ended up remembering it more as being like an egg shape. But then I became aware of this very big shining ball thing that was up above. That's the best way to describe it. So the egg thing, or the egg unit, then had myself in it, but that's all. And that then moved up into the under area very slowly, very carefully, and was taken into an area that was almost like absorbed into it and then opened. And that opened into, it looked like, to me, it looked like a play area. And it was very warm. There was no issues with it. It wasn't bright and it wasn't low lit. It was just very calm, and it had sort of a pinkish hue to it. That it was an area where there was laughter, there were children that were also playing, there was different toys and different aspects on the floor, not just toys that you would expect in the 60s, but other types of toys from other countries that were extremely interesting, different types of dollies and teddies and soft toys and trains and different types of things, that rickshaws and things. And there were all these children that were different. There were those that had dark skins, there were those that were sort of brown skinned, they had those that were extremely dark skinned. And then there were others that had items in their hair. There was a child that had very, very long black hair past her bottom, and she had it. Some of it was in braids on the side, very, very, very long. who appeared to be a native Indian person, very pretty little girl. Then there were others that were in their own traditional dress with unusual shoes, and I think that they were Japanese. But we all managed, we were fine. We all just managed with each other. I was dressed in what I had on as a 3-year-old. Everybody just got on. And it's almost like we were looking into what I would call some sort of a mirror. It looked like a mirror. To me, it looked like a mirror, because I remember that the mirror that I had in my bedroom, it was an oval one on a stand, and it was not on the wall. And then my mother and I would stand there in front of it, and she'd comb my hair, and she'd make sure check that you're pretty, check that you're pretty, and that would be it. And the mirror would move. The mirror on the craft, what I thought was a mirror, obviously might not have been a mirror, but it looked like a mirror. You could see not just yourself in the front of it, but you could also see further. You could see places around the world. You could also see places that were very obviously different places in other planets. So depending on how they were turning it and what they were doing, you could see all sorts of areas in different time areas. There were different symbols as well. There was one symbol that I remember very clearly and had like a dot in it, and there was a rounded swirl in it. Then there was others that had lines, and I didn't know what any of those meant anyway. So there were things that I just thought were pretty patterns. And I think the other children as well were kind of the same. None of us really knew what was on the sides of the walls of the room that we were in. But all of us, no matter who we all were fine. We all got on with each other. We all were given like a funny, squashy, like a bit like a smoothie. Weird. And it was it was a very funny tasting, quite thick. It was like, ugh. And it sort of left your mouth all furry. And we were given that on the craft. And then after that, I didn't remember that much, apart from knowing that there was a big insect, a very big insect, that was standing sort of over there, and it had like a cone dome face with this, and I must admit I'm not particularly happy with insects, especially those with lots of legs. So when I saw that, I wasn't happy with it either, mainly because it was part of my torture as a child. If I didn't do as I was told and service individuals, my punishment was to be sat on a stool in a baking tray pan of insects, which included bugs and roaches and spiders. And that was, if you're a good girl, you can have X, but if you're a bad girl, you know what's going to happen. So this, for me, with that very big insect, it was terrifying. But at least with whatever we were given to eat or drink, it made us very calm, and we didn't fear this creature that was in the side. I came to realize later that they were dwarf or mound mantis beings that had like a different type of head on them. Extremely clever, very, very good at DNA manipulation. There was no problem with that particular being, because that being was all part of the collective and was working for the same thing, for the same goal. Because of the way that human beings had been genetically engineered, we are meant to be taking a very strong role across the cosmos in the future. So that was all part of the first 20 years and return. We go on to some of the other areas, which is the biplanetary, the Earth, Moon, and civilization, which has the extraterrestrial side. And this talks about some of the solar properties, solar powers, and the propulsion systems. And this starts in 1993. But that also links into some of the areas where you've got the manned and reusable spacecraft. So those is part and parcel of what the second and third events were.
Could you identify some names in that and the year that was planned and those particular the statements of those circular zones?
The circular zone. So this particular circular zone, the permanent human presence in space, started in 1988 and then finished finally and being collectively, if you like, signed off as yes, this is correct, this is what is happening, was then in 1998. So it's a very long period. So 88 to 98, that is where you've got the extended, the period where all of those contracts, all of the building, the creation, the propulsion areas, and the intercollaboration, which is very key actually, between the Soviets and also some of the other nations that we perhaps don't think that...
Could you list them there?
Well,
because
here
a lot of us didn't seem to have space programs, but we seem to be doing something.
They did have space programs. They just didn't make them known. They provided some of the ones, if I remember, some of the ones were giving between 5 and 7 individuals that were then sent off. So there was always between 5 and 7 Soviets, between 5 and 7 of the Chinese peoples, and then there was an Asian contingent, shall we say, that was also being sent. So when you look at these, you've got the Soviet space station was called Freedom, and then the Soviet space station later was called MIR, and then you had the consulars, the transportation, the shuttles, and you've got various different fleets, and you've got all of these, space labs, the usual stuff.
The important thing about this is that we know that the Russians did have a shuttle, and
they did.
There were 3 of them.
Yes.
And the roof collapsed on one of them, and they flew independently, and then everything stopped.
Yeah.
Did things continue in another way or what?
They did, because you had the in-space development program. So these areas here where you've got the extended duration in orbits, where you've got the commercial space facilities and the Western space facilities, so you've got then the Germanic aspect, which are those that were part of a particular group of individuals that had already provided a lot of gold. They had also agreed to provide missing children or kidnapped children or lost children or runaways as part of the agreement with the off-worlders. They had already started that process in like the 60s. This was part of this 1988 to 1998. This area here.
Now, we're dealing with conventional spacecraft with solid rocket engines and fuel tanks and all that sort of stuff, but we do have the SSP and the Luftwaffe and stuff.
Yes, that's true.
Does this show itself in any way on this diagram?
I think you probably would have found it coming up in the extended duration commercial space facilities.
In other words, they would have a term.
There would be probably something. I'm looking to see whether there was a term on here. You've got here the crew return vehicles. You've got the waste pumps, and you've got the different, the community, if you like, and the station structures, and the International Space Station modules, as well as all the logistic elements, which each of those individuals, particularly like Luftwaffe and the various Reichsmachts, would be part of that. And if you take it further across to these areas, the different orbit activities, that was already part of this larger bubble that we see here, where there's that increased reusable and manned, as in humans, spacecraft. So this is where you would see those with jump capabilities, and that went again.
That's above warp 1.
Yes, it would be.
And that goes back to 1929, 1920s.
Yes, it does.
Does it go back even further?
I don't think it does. I don't think I've ever seen, I don't remember anything pre directly pre the 1960s, which is my own personal memories, are back to 1963, 64. I don't remember anything being shown to me that's before that. I think there must have been something in the 30s where there
Why?
was connection because of the type of dress and the way that the people were.
This is key. This is the kind of thing I'm really interested in. It's the old-fashioned way that they do things and why it's still in use.
At the time when I was little and when I was first involved with it in the early 60s, if I think about some of the individuals that I saw in and out of the craft and when we had gone to different facilities, you know, they were wearing things that looked to me. I remember my grandmother, and when my great-grandmother was alive, they were dressed that way. They had those horrible-looking shoes, which were like from the 20s. And they had, you know, different types of clothing. And they had, you know, the flapper type of look as well, which was very pretty. But there was very specific time frames where you could see these individuals that had come from almost like a different time frame altogether. And that's the only clue, if you like, that I can say that must have been from a totally different era, our time on Earth School, because of the way they were dressed. That's the only clue that I can see it as.
But that means that they were allowed to intermix. They were allowed to walk about, and there'd be no questions asked. It became normal.
I think it was normalized, you know, because the human race are easily adaptable. We are one of the greatest warriors, apart from obviously reptilians and various other types of beings that are out there. Human beings are extremely adaptable, and they can be regenerated very quickly, very easily, and they can be cloned just as easily. But also, you can, when you are brought back, you got your mind wipe. In most instances, I will say not all instances, but in most instances,
What
it is
circumstances
wiped.
would require that you didn't have your mind wiped? But there's only so many times you have your mind wiped and it doesn't work anymore, or what?
I think some individuals are very, very strong within themselves and energetically are very strong. And some individuals in the beginning, we're talking in the 60s, the technology that they had wasn't actually that good, in much as they couldn't wipe absolutely everything. And there were snippets that used to bleed through and leach through into the mind and it would come into the fore, and you would end up feeling this pressure, and you'd think, oh my God, what is that that's coming? What is that? And then you'd see these images coming into your eyes with your eyes closed, which is awful. And then you'd quickly switch on the light and think, oh, well, you expect something to be there, and it's not. And then you just count it. And then slowly but surely that energy and those images start coming thicker and closer to each other. And that's when you realize that this is not something that I personally know from Earth. This is something that is totally outside of me. This is not, either you say to yourself, this is not real, and what's coming through to me now, I'm not going to accept it, and you just close it back down. But then you do eventually later on, 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, you realize that those images that were coming through thick and fast actually were memories. You just have to look at, say, for instance, one person I know who's brought through all of his memories was Tony Rodriguez.
I noticed you put your hand up. Is that a particular reason why you put your hand up to say that something stopped or that were memory?
Well, that is what I do is part of that is to close off the third eye. And that's what I used to do. I used to just close off the third eye and say, no, I'm not going to allow it, because when the memories come through to me, they hit my third eye, but they also hit the other two eyes that are situated above my two human eyes. So I have three, sadly. not the greatest look, I know, but the main one is in the middle. And if I close that off,
Now, are you talking about eyes at the top of the head each side?
yeah,
Are they in the etheric or what?
they for myself, I can only speak for what I've seen myself as when I've been off world, particularly when I've had a different type of energy body, when they've been splicing with felines, etc. I have this middle section, and then I have the two areas here above the top, which are they act as eyes. They appear to be as eyes. So when I close this off, what I'm doing is I'm saying, nope, I'm not going to allow anything else to go through. I actively shut it.
I'm thinking of spiders.
Oh, don't. No, not
Do
spiders.
they have, no, but is the reason why they would have more than, would they be psychic or whatever? No.
I don't know. It's just, I know that some of the genetic changes that were made to one of the lifetimes that I spent for the 20 years, the changes that were made and the splicing of other DNA was with a feline member, and that made me look slightly different. Not too bad, but different enough to be able to do my job, which would mean that because I was a hybrid, if you like, I was able then to both extract information from either humans or part-bred hybrids, as well as felines, as well as those that are able to interbreed and intermix with different races.
What circumstances, where and how?
Well, it was again going back to the same facility, so the same planetoid where you have, well, for want of a better word, the ranch, the pleasure planet, which is what a lot of individuals that were all there at the same time ended up referring to it as, because we had to find common ground amongst all of us. You know, where are we? What are we doing? And if we ever remembered when we were back on Earth School, what would we know it as? And that's what we referred to it as. So it would be, each of us had different roles. Some were assisting in the genetic lab, like Beaver Boy, Joey Beaver Boy, and others, with 3 or 4 or 5 other young humans that were purchased just to work in the labs, and they slept underneath all the lab tables. They were sleeping underneath there in a very cozy little area. That was their area, their sleeping area. Others had different functions. So what we were doing is when we were at the auction area, we would say, well, where are we? What are we doing? And what is this place? Why? What is this place? What's going to become of us? What will eventually happen? Are we going to end up back with our families? Or is this our fate? We've been removed from Earth. We know we were on Earth. We know where we started growing up, and now we've ended up in this place. So we made sure that we all, in the auction area, knew this is what this place was. This is where the auction takes place. This is how it happens. And if we ever get to remember anything, ever, if we are lucky enough to be returned back to our home planet, back to Earth, we would remember it as that.
If we're all having a good time with all different types of races, there must be a common link to them. Are we part of a different family, or are we differently evolved in terms of being manufactured by the mantids or whoever designs and makes us? And who does design and make us?
From what I understood, I mean, those that served in the labs, those that served with those that had the task to design new beings or new plants or new flora, fauna, whatever for each of the planets, because that is something that does happen. And I've seen it on a number of occasions, particularly the crafts, where they will go to the mantis beings in a particular facility, and they will pick up all of the genetic material that has been designed for that new planet. So there's just as much as there's, 3, 4, 5, 700 different Goldilocks planets. So the planets that are ideal for us as humans to go and live on. There are other planets that are ideal for other species too, not just us. There's other species that need to be evacuated, something's happening to their planet, or there's a new breed that has been created, lab created, just as we were created, and they're then placed onto another planet. So you'll get all of those that are then moved to other planets. So you'll have an entire ark, which is the craft that takes everything to the new planet. You will have then the mantis beings, as well as 1 or 2 other beings that I don't quite know what they're called. I know what they look like, but I don't know what they're called. They would then take, well, these are my creations, and then the others would say, these are my creations, these are my plants, or these are my so-called animals, or these are those that live under the surface or above the surface. They would have all that created so that these new planets with new life forms and species could then be created. They would take the ark to that planet and they would terraform it, which is done by the elementals. Elementals are the first ones to go in and they terraform.
Explain elemental, because there's all sorts of a spiritual being or what. And the other thing is, where would all this be classified, and is there a reference manual you can get on all this? There must be a cross-referencing index somewhere.
I think there must be somewhere. I think somebody must have written one somewhere. I mean, I can only refer to what I have personal experience of and what my memories have been. And with Beaver Boy, we had spoken about what we had personally seen in the lab. And his person that bought him was called the Master. And he had created some amazing flowers and plants and trees and really, really beautiful, beautiful things. And he had these...
Did any of them play guitar and sing in a greenhouse somewhere?
Not that I know of. I don't think they did.
I'm thinking of a film.
They do have music. It's not a guitar, though. The music that they have is very different. And some of it is extremely high-pitched, and others is like a very low hum in various frequencies. So they do have music of a sort, that we've actually both heard this type of music, and it's very calming and very peaceful. So this is part of what we had seen, and we were swapping notes. And at the time, we had both said that we had remembered one particular incident where these tubes had the life force of particular new plants, which were for a new planet, which was going to be given to a group of beings that were being evacuated from another planet somewhere else. And we were saying we wanted to make sure that this particular being was able to have the last 3 of these beautiful plants propagated and cloned and recreated so that they could go to that particular planet. And that was one of the last times that Joey Beaver Boy and myself, because I had gone there to do something specifically as an older person, and we'd recognized each other, and I'd said to him, how are you doing? Are you coping with being on this facility? Have you learned anything about DNA? Have you learned about laboratory work? And he was explaining what he'd learned. So I was only there for for a limited period, and then I had to go. But he had said, these are the creations, and they were all on this very big lab table. And he said these were the lab creations that were going to go to a particular planet, and it would help then to allow this particular species to grow, because a lot of those items was either previously extinct or partially extinct, and they had been regenerated. And that was one of the key discussions that I'd had with him. And that's how we got talking about, what do you remember? What do I remember? And actually looking at the different aspects of my memories and the different aspects of his memories, but they were all basically racking and stacking up against exactly the same thing, but just from a different perspective. His perspective from being in the facility where the DNA lab was, and my perspective where I was an outsider coming in a transport to that particular area to collect something that needed to go to another planet.
I'm just trying to see the practicalities of this, how some would be made, who would make them. Are we talking a sort of a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy sort of situation? Was that, in some respects, you got long-bearded people chiseling out the fjords of Norway, that kind of thing?
The individuals that are in the laboratory areas that do the DNA and that, only ones that I had ever seen was the dome head mantis beings. I personally had never seen any other beings. I think there might have been a light type of being at the end, but I had never had any interaction with that being. The only ones that I had interaction was the humans that had been purchased to work in the lab, and of course the one that I remember, the Joey Beaver boy. But that was the only ones that I'd seen. So from my point of view, there could be others, there probably are others, but I had had no interaction with them, so I never remember any of them. The only ones I remembered was the dome-headed type of mantis beings, and that was it. I don't remember seeing anything else other than that sort of apparition of the very sparkly one, but I don't know what that one was doing.
Well, we've been running for about an hour and 13 minutes or so. Where do you see this evolving? Again, I'm looking for descriptions of buildings, machinery, types of view screens to get an idea of where we are going with this and who's operating them. Who are the... I shouldn't ask two questions at the same time.
So I think the screens, if you want to call them screens, some of the screens that I had seen, one set of the screens wasn't actually a screen. It was just a bowed out liquid something or other, and this liquid you could see manifest on top of it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the type of screens and technology they're using, because allegedly they had color plasma screens and things like that way back, in the bases 20 years before we got them in the 80s or 90s. I mean, is that kind of stuff? Is there anything new that gets filtered through into our side of things?
I think eventually what we were perceiving and experiencing during our 20 years in return, eventually that technology will exist here. One of the aspects that I was very involved with was putting my hand into something that felt like warm cheese, but it wasn't cheese. It had a domed shape, and that dome shape was how I was able to take, again, from the third eye, from my energy, remember something, see it, and then take that vision and put that straight into whatever this apparatus was, press into it and download, literally take that image and download it into that particular apparatus, which would then become manifest and go to wherever it was programmed to go to.
What do you mean by become manifest? Translate from a image or some kind of 3D image on a screen,
yes, it would
into
be
a physical 3D object.
It would be
as in a.
Yeah, you'd made manifest. It was like you could see it. So it would be like what I was remembering. It was as if your memories would be taken and put into a sphere of cheese, because it felt like cheese. It was warm, but it was also felt quite wet and granular at the same time. And you'd put that, you'd think about it, and you'd put that into that sphere of that particular material, and within a couple of seconds, you'd be able to see what you remembered. It would be there. So it wouldn't be verbal, it wouldn't be, a piece of evidence. It would be whatever it was that you were seeing, that you experienced, that the mark, in other words, the person that I had been assigned to me as the mark, and I was told, get this, get that. Whatever the mark was explaining to me would go into that sphere.
Now, there's been another witness referring to pods or egg-type things containing people, which then get placed into a human being, and that's how you become pregnant, so to speak. Is that the way the cookie crumbles? Is that the way all that happens?
I had seen genetic changes, and I had seen the creation of individuals, and I agree that there is like a funny little egg thing, and they're all attached separately, hundreds of them, all attached separately, and you have these different beings, and it's not just humans, it's all other types of human hybrids as well, because there's not just humans here on Earth. There's human hybrids on Earth too. There's not just humans. There's a lot of others that are walking with us at the same time. So these little sort of teardrop shaped is the best way to explain it. I do remember when one of my sessions, I did actually draw them, and I drew each of them, and I drew what the console looked like, and how you have to put the person that's operating them has to put their hand or their claw or whatever it is. They have to put that onto that area. That then ignites that energy, and then there's another energy of something that comes into the being that needs to be taken to the portal. Now the portal is actually the womb or the carrier womb of the person that is going to birth the being, whether it's on this planet or another planet, doesn't matter, same process. And that portal then is where those beings come through to, and then are brought into being onto the earth. So yes, I would agree with whoever said that. That's pretty much the same as what I saw.
Well, I think it's probably time for a wee break, do you think?
Good idea.
Okay, well, we've done our promo for the conference, and that's going to be part of this. So we'll continue these discussions, and for the meantime, on BASES2025.com. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.